My parents sat in my custom-built living room, sipping the expensive coffee I bought, and calmly demanded I sell my home to pay off my brother's massive debts. They said I owed them for the gift of life. What they didn't know was I had already uncovered their darkest secret. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that settles into your bones when you realize your family's love is conditional. For as long as I can remember, the dynamic in the Jenkins household was as rigid as the concrete foundations I would later learn to pour. I was the workhorse. My older brother, Caleb, was the prized show pony. Growing up in a modest suburb of Chicago, money was always a topic of tense whispers between my parents, Richard and Linda. But the scarcity of funds somehow only ever applied to me. When I was 16, I begged for a used laptop for my advanced placement classes. My mother sighed, rubbing her temples as if my request was physically painful. "Sarah, you know things are tight right now," she told me, her eyes brimming with practiced sympathy. "You're so resourceful. You can just use the library computers. It builds character." 2 weeks later, Caleb turned 18. My parents threw a lavish backyard barbecue, complete with catered ribs and a rented DJ. The grand finale. My father blindfolding Caleb and leading him to the driveway to reveal a brand new, metallic blue Honda Civic. Not a hand-me-down. A dealership-fresh car with a giant red bow on the hood. I stood by the punch bowl, holding a stack of index cards I had been using to study, feeling a cold, hollow pit open in my stomach. "He needs it for college, Sarah," my father explained later, when he caught me staring out the window at Caleb revving the engine. "Caleb has a delicate constitution. He can't be taking the bus to campus. You're strong. You've always been our tough girl." That became the mantra of my life. Caleb is sensitive. Sarah is strong. When it came time for higher education, the disparity shifted from unfair to financially crippling. Caleb was accepted into a private liberal arts college in Boston. The tuition was astronomical. My parents didn't blink. They remortgaged our family home, drained their savings, and proudly shipped him off, funding a lifestyle of fraternities, ski trips, and networking events. He changed his major 4 times in 3 years, moving from philosophy to art history, and finally to communications, before quietly dropping out. Meanwhile, I was accepted into the architecture program at the University of Illinois. When I sat my parents down at the kitchen table to discuss tuition, my father cleared his throat, unable to look me in the eye. "We're tapped out, sweetheart," he muttered, tracing the wood grain of the table. "Caleb's education took everything, but you've always been so independent. We're incredibly proud of you. We know you'll figure it out." Figure it out, I did. I worked 3 jobs. I served tables at a greasy diner called O'Malley's until 2 a.m., smelling perpetually of stale fries and bleach. I tutored struggling freshmen in calculus. On weekends, I hauled lumber and laid tile for a local contractor, Mr. Henderson, just to learn the physical reality of the buildings I was studying on paper. I graduated at the top of my class with a 3.9 GPA, completely burned out, with $75,000 in student loan debt strapped to my back. My graduation day should have been a triumph. Instead, I walked across the stage to an empty section of bleachers. My parents hadn't made the drive. Why? Because Caleb had just gone through a devastating breakup with a girl he had been dating for 3 months, and my mother couldn't possibly leave him alone in his apartment in New York while he was in crisis. I remember standing in my cap and gown in the campus parking lot, watching other families take photos, hand out bouquets, and hug their children. I took a selfie, sent it to my own phone, and drove myself to my shift at the diner. That was the day the last shred of my childhood innocence died. I realized then that I had no safety net. I only had myself. Over the next 10 years, I turned that bitter realization into relentless ambition. I moved to Denver, Colorado, taking a junior position at a prestigious commercial architecture firm. I outworked everyone. I skipped vacations, lived on ramen and cheap coffee, and funneled every spare cent into paying off my loans. By the time I was 28, I was debt-free. By 30, I was made a junior partner at the firm. I bought a stunning, dilapidated mid-century modern house in the foothills and spent 2 years meticulously restoring it with my own 2 hands. It was my sanctuary. It was proof that I existed, that I mattered, and that I could build something beautiful from the dirt up. Caleb, on the other hand, became a professional parasite. He fancied himself an entrepreneur, which was a polite way of saying he jumped from one disastrous, half-baked scheme to another, entirely funded by the bank of Mom and Dad. First, it was a bespoke artisanal candle business that burned through $20,000. Then, it was an innovative app for dog walkers that crashed upon launch, costing my parents another $40,000. He was 32 years old, living in a luxury high-rise apartment in Austin, Texas, entirely subsidized by 2 people who were nearing retirement age. I kept my distance. We spoke on holidays, where I endured my mother's endless monologues about Caleb's potential and how his big break was just around the corner. They rarely asked about my firm, and they certainly never asked about my life. I was fine with the arrangement. Silence was better than the alternative, but the silence was about to be violently shattered. It was a brisk Tuesday evening in October when the phone rang. The caller ID flashed, Mom. It was unusual for her to call me on a weekday, especially without Caleb being the pretext. Sarah? Her voice was thin, trembling, carrying a frantic edge I hadn't heard before. We need to see you. Your father and I are flying into Denver on Thursday. We need to have an urgent family meeting. Is someone sick? I asked, my heart doing a brief, involuntary stutter. Despite everything, they were still my parents. No, no one is sick. But it's an emergency. Please, Sarah, just be home. When they arrived at my house on Thursday night, they looked 10 years older than the last time I had seen them. My father's shoulders were slumped, his face lined with deep, graying exhaustion. My mother nervously clutched her designer handbag, a gift from Caleb, paid for, ironically, with their own money. I invited them in, made them espresso, and sat them down in the living room I had designed myself. The room featured massive floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the pine trees, a limestone fireplace, and custom walnut shelving. I saw my mother's eyes dart around, taking in the undeniable evidence of my wealth. For a fleeting second, I saw a flash of something ugly cross her face. Resentment? Jealousy? It vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the practiced mask of a victim. So what's the emergency? I asked, sitting opposite them in a leather armchair. My father sighed, resting his elbows on his knees. Sarah, we're in trouble, deep trouble. We're facing foreclosure on the house. I froze. Foreclosure? Dad, you and Mum have lived in that house for 30 years. Your mortgage should have been paid off a decade ago. My mother burst into tears. It's Caleb, she sobbed, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. He had an amazing opportunity, a cryptocurrency startup. He said it was a sure thing. He just needed bridge capital to get the servers running. We took out a second mortgage to help him. And then the market crashed. His partners ran off with the funds. I stared at them, the sheer stupidity of the situation washing over me. How much, Dad? I asked, my voice deadly calm. $150,000, he whispered. Plus, we maxed out our credit cards to keep his apartment lease afloat while he tries to recover. We're drowning, Sarah. If we don't come up with $80,000 by the end of the month, the bank is taking the house. I felt a surge of pity, quickly followed by a tidal wave of anger. I warned you, I said softly. I told you 5 years ago that Caleb was taking advantage of you. You called me a jealous, unsupportive sister. We didn't come here to be lectured, my father snapped, a spark of his old, domineering self returning. We are family. Family helps family. Okay, I said, leaning back. So, what are you doing about it? Is Caleb getting a job? Is he moving out of that luxury apartment to help pay you back? My mother looked horrified. Caleb is in a very dark place right now, Sarah. He is terribly depressed. We can't put any more pressure on him. He feels awful about it. Not awful enough to get a job at Starbucks, apparently, I muttered. That's exactly why we are here, my father interrupted, his tone shifting into something dangerously entitled. He looked around my pristine living room, gesturing to the architecture. You've done very well for yourself, Sarah. Very well. Better than any of us expected. The backhanded compliment stung, but I didn't flinch. I worked for it. And we are proud of you, but we need your help. We've spoken to a real estate agent. This house of yours in this market, it's worth easily over $1 million. You have tremendous equity. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the wind howling against the glass panes. I blinked, genuinely unsure if I had heard him correctly. Are you suggesting I take out a loan on my house to pay for Caleb's crypto scam? No, my mother said, leaning forward and grasping my hands with cold, clammy fingers. We're asking you to sell it. I yanked my hands away as if she had burned me. What? Sell the house, Sarah, my father said, his voice hardening, taking on the tone of an executive giving an order. You're single. You don't have kids. You don't need all this space. You can easily buy a nice little condo closer to the city, give us the $150,000 to clear our debts, and still have money left over. It's the logical solution. I stood up. I felt physically sick. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of the request made the room spin. You want me to sell my home, the home I designed, the home I built with my own hands, the home I paid for with the money I earned, working 80-hour weeks, to bail out my 32-year-old brother because you two couldn't stop babying him? We raised you, my mother shrieked, suddenly dropping the victim act, her face turning red. We put a roof over your head. We fed you. You owe us, Sarah. You wouldn't be where you are today if we hadn't taught you how to work hard. You didn't teach me how to work hard, Mum. You forced me to, because you gave every single resource we had to Caleb, I yelled back, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. You refused to pay for my college. You didn't even come to my graduation. I owe you absolutely nothing. My father stood up, pointing a trembling finger at me. You selfish, ungrateful girl. We are about to be on the street, your own parents, and you are going to sit here in your mansion and watch us burn? Yes, I said. The word dropped between us like a lead weight, cold, final. I will absolutely watch you burn if it means protecting the life I built without you. Fine, my father spat, grabbing his coat. But don't come crying to us when you end up old and alone because you abandoned your blood. Let's go, Linda. My mother paused at the door, turning back to look at me with venom in her eyes. Your grandmother was right about you, she hissed. She always said you were too cold to handle the trust properly. The front door slammed shut behind them, leaving me standing alone in the quiet of my house. My heart was pounding against my ribs. I walked over to the kitchen island, poured myself a glass of water, and tried to steady my shaking hands. But my mother's parting words echoed loudly in my mind, drowning out everything else. The trust? My grandparents had passed away when I was 14. To my knowledge, they hadn't left a dime. My parents had always claimed the estate was swallowed by medical bills and nursing home costs. I had never questioned it. I was just a kid. But something about the way my mother said it, the slip of the tongue fueled by rage, ignited a massive, glaring red flag in my brain. I didn't sleep that night. By 8 a.m. the next morning, I was sitting in the office of an estate attorney I occasionally collaborated with for my firm. I gave him my grandparents' names, their county of residence, and my social security number, and asked him to do a deep dive into probate records. It took 3 agonizing days to get the files. When the attorney finally called me back into his office and slid a thick manila folder across the desk, the look of grim pity on his face told me everything I needed to know before I even opened it. The karma that was about to hit my family wouldn't just be a storm. It was going to be an absolute hurricane, and I was going to be the one steering it. The attorney, David Ross, was a man who had spent 30 years navigating the murky, often treacherous waters of family estates and corporate law. He was not prone to exaggeration or dramatics. So, when he looked at me across his mahogany desk, folded his hands tightly, and said, "Sarah, what I am about to show you is going to change everything you know about your parents." My blood ran completely cold. He opened the thick manila folder and turned it toward me. Sitting on top was a document adorned with the official seal of Cook County, Illinois. It was a declaration of trust dated 18 years ago. "Your grandfather, Arthur Jenkins, was a very frugal, very intelligent man," David began, his voice steady. "Before he passed, he and your grandmother established the Jenkins Grandchildren Educational and Milestone Trust. It was funded with $500,000. The stipulations were incredibly clear, written in black and white. The money was to be divided equally. $250,000 for Caleb and $250,000 for you." I stared at the paper, the letters blurring together. I don't understand," I stammered, feeling the room tilt on its axis. "My parents always said there was nothing left. They said Grandpa's nursing home drained everything." "That was a lie," David said flatly. "The medical expenses were covered by a separate insurance policy. The trust was entirely intact. The funds were locked into high-yield accounts, designed to be released to you and your brother in stages, a portion for college tuition, and the remainder released unconditionally upon your 25th birthdays." I closed my eyes. The memories hit me like physical blows. I remembered eating instant oatmeal for dinner 7 nights a week while studying for my architecture finals. I remembered crying in my car outside the diner because my tip money wasn't enough to cover my heating bill, forcing me to sleep in a winter coat. I remembered my parents looking me in the eye and telling me they had absolutely nothing to give me for my education. "If the money was locked until we were 25, I said, my voice barely a whisper. How did I never know? I turned 25 over 7 years ago. No one contacted me. David flipped to the next page. Because your parents were named as the primary trustees until the beneficiaries came of age, and they exploited a loophole. They submitted continuous, heavily documented requests to the financial institution managing the trust, claiming you were incapacitated by various imaginary life events, or that you had authorized them to act as your proxy for business investments. He slid a stack of bank transfer receipts across the desk. My eyes scanned the highlighted lines. Transfer, $20,000. Memo: Sarah Jenkins. Business seed money. Transfer, $45,000. Memo: Sarah Jenkins. Real estate investment. They forged your signature, Sarah, David explained grimly. Repeatedly, consistently, over the course of a decade, they systematically drained your half of the trust to fund Caleb's failed artisanal candle business, his dog-walking app, his luxury apartment lease in Austin, and likely their own lifestyle. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it paralyzed me. It wasn't just that they had favored Caleb. It wasn't just that they had financially abandoned me. They had literally stolen my future to pay for his present. Every patronizing comment my mother ever made about my independence, every time my father told me I was the tough girl who could figure it out, it was all a psychological smokescreen to hide their embezzlement. How much is left? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Of your portion, 0, David said. They emptied the last of your funds 3 years ago. Ironically, Caleb's half of the trust was entirely depleted by his 24th birthday. Your parents effectively gave him his inheritance, and then they gave him yours. A strange, eerie calm settled over me. It was the same hyper-focused calm I felt when I was untangling a complex structural flaw in a building blueprint. The emotion was gone. Only the architecture of vengeance remained. David, I said, looking up at him, I want to hire a forensic accountant. I want every single dime traced. I want the forged signatures verified by an expert graphologist. And then, I want you to draft a civil lawsuit for breach of fiduciary duty, gross negligence, and civil fraud. I also want a criminal complaint prepared for wire fraud and embezzlement. David raised an eyebrow, a flicker of professional respect passing through his eyes. They are your parents, Sarah. This path, it will result in their total financial ruin, and quite possibly prison time. They made their choice, I replied, standing up from the chair. Now, they get to pay the bill. For the next 3 weeks, I played the dutiful, concerned daughter. I hired a brilliant forensic accountant named Chloe, who tore through my parents' financial history like a shark through water. She built an ironclad, undeniable paper trail, proving exactly where my $250,000 had gone. Once the binders were assembled and the trap was perfectly set, I picked up the phone and called my mother. "Mum," I said, injecting just enough defeat into my voice to make it believable. "I've been thinking about what Dad said, about family. I want to help." I could hear her sharp intake of breath, followed by a triumphant sigh. "Oh, Sarah, I knew you would come to your senses. I told your father, I said, Sarah is a good girl. She won't let us drown." "Yes," I agreed smoothly. "But I need Caleb to be there. This involves all of us. I need you, Dad, and Caleb to fly into Denver this Friday. We are going to meet at my lawyer's office to sign the paperwork and transfer the funds." "Of course, sweetheart. We'll book the tickets right now. We love you so much." I hung up the phone and stared out the window of my beautiful, hard-won home. You're going to need those tickets, I thought, because you're about to lose everything else. Friday afternoon arrived with a biting, cold wind sweeping down from the Rockies. I sat at the head of the long glass table in David Ross's downtown conference room. David sat to my right, 2 massive black binders resting in front of him. At exactly 2 p.m., the receptionist opened the double doors. My parents walked in, radiating a sickening aura of smug victory. My father was wearing a tailored suit, looking like a man who had just closed a major business deal. My mother beamed at me, practically vibrating with relief. Trailing behind them was Caleb. He was wearing a designer cashmere sweater and looking profoundly bored, tapping away on the latest iPhone, an object I now knew was purchased with my stolen inheritance. "Sarah, honey," my mother cooed, rushing forward to hug me. I stood up and took a deliberate step backward, gesturing to the chairs opposite me. She blinked, confused, but took a seat next to my father. "Let's get this over with." Caleb sighed, slumping into his chair and crossing his arms. I had to cancel a very important networking lunch in Austin for this. "I assure you, Caleb," I said, my voice dripping with ice, "this meeting will be the most important networking event of your entire life." My father rubbed his hands together. "So, Mr. Ross, Sarah mentioned we are signing the transfer documents today. Are we doing a direct wire from the house sale? We brought our routing numbers." David didn't smile. He didn't even blink. He simply slid one of the heavy black binders across the smooth glass table. It stopped precisely in front of my father. "Mr. Jenkins, Mrs. Jenkins," David said, his voice dropping into a severe, authoritative register. "Before we discuss any transfers, we need to review the contents of this binder. It contains the forensic accounting of the Arthur Jenkins Grandchildren Educational Trust, over which you served as executors." The color drained from my father's face so fast, I thought he might pass out. My mother's jaw dropped, her eyes darting frantically between me and the lawyer. Caleb just looked confused, entirely out of his depth. I don't know what you're talking about," my father stammered, his confident posture completely collapsing. "That trust was dissolved years ago." "It was depleted," I corrected him, leaning forward, bracing my hands on the table. "Not dissolved. Depleted. By you. To the tune of $250,000. Money that belonged to me, which you systematically drained using forged signatures to fund your golden boy's pathetic attempts at playing businessman." "Sarah, please," my mother whispered, her voice shaking violently. "You don't understand. Caleb needed it. You were doing so well on your own. We didn't want to bother you." "Bother me?" I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that echoed off the glass walls. "You watched me work 3 jobs until I was physically ill. You watched me drown in student debt. You told me I had to figure it out, while you stole my grandfather's legacy to buy Caleb a Honda Civic and fund a bespoke candle company. That isn't a bother, Mum. That's a felony." I turned to Caleb, who was now staring at our parents in absolute horror. The realization that his entire life of luxury was built on his sister's stolen money was visibly short-circuiting his brain. "You stole from her?" Caleb asked, his voice cracking. "You told me that money was from your investments." "Shut up, Caleb," my father snapped, panicking. He looked back at David. "Look, we can explain. It was a misallocation of funds. We fully intended to pay it back once Caleb's crypto startup took off." "Save it for the judge," David interrupted, sliding a legal document from a secondary folder. "This is a draft of a civil lawsuit for breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, and embezzlement. Alongside it is a criminal complaint that we are fully prepared to file with the district attorney's office on Monday morning." The silence in the room was absolute. The air felt thin. "You want to talk about leverage?" I said, looking dead into my father's terrified eyes. "Here is the deal. With interest, penalties, and the cost of the forensic accountant you forced me to hire, you owe me exactly $342,000. I know you are facing foreclosure. I know you have equity in your house. You are going to sell your home, not me. You are going to liquidate your retirement accounts. You are going to pay me every single dime you stole. And if we can't," my mother sobbed, burying her face in her hands, "If you don't," I replied with absolute, unflinching conviction, "David makes a phone call, and you both go to federal prison for wire fraud." There was no negotiation. There were no family hugs. There was only the brutal, crushing weight of reality finally catching up to them. The hard karma hit them with the force of a freight train. Within 60 days, my parents' house, the house I grew up in, was sold to a young couple. Every penny of the equity was wired directly into an escrow account controlled by David, which was then transferred to me. My parents were forced to declare total bankruptcy to avoid the criminal charges. They moved out of their comfortable suburban bubble and into a cramped two-bedroom apartment in a run-down neighborhood on the outskirts of Chicago. And Caleb? Without the bank of Mom and Dad to subsidize his delusions of grandeur, his luxury life in Austin evaporated overnight. He was evicted from his high-rise. The last I heard through the grapevine, the entrepreneur was working 40 hours a week at a cell phone kiosk in a dying shopping mall, wearing a polyester polo shirt and reporting to a manager 10 years younger than him. I took the $342,000 and invested it into a massive commercial real estate project my firm was developing. It tripled in value over the next 3 years. I changed my phone number, blocked their emails, and never looked back. They wanted me to be the strong, independent workhorse. They just never expected the horse to kick down the barn doors and trample them on the way out. If you loved this story of brutal karma and family betrayal, hit that like button and subscribe for more jaw-dropping real-life dramas. Have you ever dealt with a toxic family member who demanded too much? Tell me your own story in the comments below. Please don't forget to share this video with your friends to remind them that setting boundaries is a real superpower. See you in the next video.